So, like, running backs just happens to be the thing because, like, King Miller was a huge story from last night's game. And so, continuing our discussion with running backs, Crash, you mentioned Brian Jackson. Ethan, it was very conspicuous that he got into the game because of something very specific. Talk about that situation and if you think USC is going to face any repercussions from it.
Yeah, so he came into the game kind of as a shock to everybody. I mean, I was watching and I was like, wait, Brian Jackson's playing in the game? Because, he's been out ever since week 1. He was listed as out ahead of the game on the injury report. So I was, I figured he had no chance of playing. I thought maybe, we'd see a 5th or 6th stringer, but not Brian Jackson. But he came out and played in the second half. And so apparently, according to Lincoln Riley, they got it cleared with the Big Ten office. So I don't think they're going to get fined or anything like that. But it is like a really interesting situation. I've never really seen anything like that happen. Also, to kind of update everyone on his injury, according to Lincoln Riley, he's been dealing with turf toe. So, that kind of explains the sort of longevity of his injury, but also him being able to go out and play. Like, it's a real nasty injury that can, that can become like a really, long, potentially season-ending thing if you don't take care of it, but it's also still his toe. So, if in a really dire, desperate situation, USC was able to call upon him. But yeah, I mean, shout out to him as well. Came in, 5 great carries, had the touchdown. If he can come in, it sounds like, the most recent update that I saw is that Waymond's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, and then Eli Sanders is potentially out for the year. So you're going to need as all hands on deck in terms of the rest of the running back room, if that's true. And so they're going to need Brian Jackson just as much as they're going to need King Miller for sure.
For sure, yeah. It's definitely going to be both those guys are going to have to step up, it seems like, next week. So I'm really excited to see what they can do. And hopefully Jordan can come back. But it seems like Sanders could be done. So it's definitely something that USC is going to really need to rely on that depth in that room, especially. And I think that's one thing that's great about having such a deep room. If guys get injured or have a bad day, someone else can step up and have like a big game themselves and make a case to be like, hey, I should be getting more playing time.
Absolutely. Follow-up question with the altered running back room, with Waymond being out for at least a month, roughly, and Sanders likely out for the season. How do you think this affects the dynamic of the USC offense? And without previewing Notre Dame, let's just kind of keep it within its own parameters. Just since you have a couple prime running backs now unavailable, like, should that alter just on a general conceptual level, not necessarily how many touches, but perhaps fewer handoffs, more screens? The screen game was obviously a big part of USC's offense against Michigan. Should it significantly affect the percentage of handoffs versus short passes, the way these guys are deployed, and also, of course, the balance among them? So a King Miller, Brian Jackson rotation, does it matter who's number 1, who's number 2, as well as, percentage of touches and how those touches are occurring, handoffs versus short passes? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, so I think, moving forward the next couple of weeks, especially this next week against Notre Dame, you're going to see King Miller as the RB1 and Brian Jackson, hopefully, if he's healthy, as the RB2, just because I think, Brian Jackson is still dealing with that lingering injury. And even if, he's quote unquote fully healthy ahead of the game against Notre Dame, I think you kind of are going to you're going to see him ease back into it a little bit because, like I said, turf toe is really nasty and they kind of try to be really careful with that injury in football. So I think just kind of out of injury necessity, you're going to have to see King Miller get the lion's share of the touches. I think based on how the running game worked in this game, you just kind of, try to stick to the offensive identity you've built thus far, and especially with the offensive line playing as well as they are. I think that you play King Miller and Brian Jackson like you have Waymond Jordan and Eli Sanders, at least until it doesn't work. And then if Notre Dame turns out to be a lot better defensively against the run than they looked in the first, kind of portion of the season, then you pivot and, you pivot more to the pass game, hopefully before you're down by any points or too many points. But I think, King Miller proved, not only that he deserves a scholarship and that he deserves to, be a running back who takes the field, but he proved that, the offense can run just as smoothly with him in the lineup as the other two backs. So I think, and that's not a knock on the other two backs at all. That's just all credit to him. So I think, like I said, you just, you at least try to keep that offensive identity, because I think that balance has been really crucial to USC's success this season. And then, like I said, if out of necessity you have to change it, you do. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that's concerned me about King Miller's play to this point to where I think you need to make any dramatic changes.
So I think kind of I agree with you, Ethan, that King Miller should be the RB1, Brian Jackson RB2, given Jackson's kind of questionable injury status and where he's going to kind of be coming up this week. But I think really what they should do is they should just play to the strengths of the team. So I think, I think they should, do what's best in terms of whether they're passing it more, whether they're handing it off, passing it to Miller in the backfield, that sort of thing, tossing it. I think really it should just be playing to the strengths of the running backs that they got, that they're going to likely be relying on this week. So that's how I think really that USC can have the most success, is just figuring out how do we play to the strengths of our guys. So if that does mean you have to pass more, if Miller and Jackson don't quite live up to, aren't quite able to, contribute the same way that Jordan and Sanders were, you go more to passing. But then also I think really it's just, like I said, really it just comes down to how can you just play to the strengths of your football team. That's what I think will allow USC to continue to have success with a prominent Miller Jackson backfield.
All right. Now, our friend Bob Springer, loyal viewer and listener, has been making a lot of good comments in the chat, as always, when he's here. Thank you, Bob. Bob mentions Waymond Jordan, an outstanding blocker. So you don't have him. So, Ethan, this brings up the point, and then I'll go over to Crash. Are we going to see more 2 tight end sets in the USC offense? To have one tight end in the chip, and maybe another tight end goes out for a short pass. Or maybe you just have more. You're just going to have a tight end all the time with your 2 wideouts and a setback in the backfield. In terms of personnel groupings, not having Waymond Jordan and his pass blocking in the equation, how do you think that changes the personnel and what USC and Lincoln Riley should be sending out on the field? And again, this is not a Notre Dame specific thing. People are going to obviously, wonder, what about Notre Dame? We'll save that for Tuesday. But just on again, general conceptual level, you don't have Waymo into pass pro. How does that affect the usage of tight ends and the overall personnel groupings? Ethan first, Crash second.
Yeah, so they've already been using tight ends a lot. I think specifically, though, you could see a little bit more of tight ends lining up in the backfield as if they are back. You saw that yesterday on one play with Carson Tabaracci coming out, and he's, the third string tight end, and he came out and lined up like he's a back. And I think, Carson Tabaracci's number is in the 20s, so it's potentially confusing for other teams because he looks like a running back. Like he's not the tallest tight end you've ever seen, and he's like number 24 or something. So teams could potentially think that he's a running back, and, maybe you hand it off to him once or twice in short yardage situations to keep the other team honest, and not give it away entirely every time that it's always going to be a pass play. But so, yeah, I think that you could see that for sure. Crash talked about playing to the strengths of this team. Like the tight ends are obviously a really deep room, especially when everybody in that room is fully healthy. So, that could be part of the calculus as well. But yeah, I think, that play with Tabaracci really stood out to me as potentially noteworthy because I think that that's a strategy they could employ.
I absolutely agree, Ethan. I think probably we will see. I would expect USC would probably see more tight end use to block, especially because if you lose someone like Waymond Jordan, who is a great blocker, how do you make up for that? So I think that is one way they can do that, especially with a position like tight end, where you have kind of that dynamic versatility of being able to both catch passes, but also stay back and block. So I think that's definitely a strategy, I think, that I would very much think that USC is going to want to employ going forward, especially with Jordan out for the next 4 to 6 weeks.
All right, so we've gone from personnel groupings to let's now go to play calling because like these things flow together. It's like just a series of dominoes. So so you don't want to get your running backs beaten up. Like you need to keep them healthy to the extent that you can for November and Nebraska and Iowa, and then of course Oregon and UCLA. But obviously, you can't just be a Johnny One Note. It can't just be Jordan Mailata slinging the ball. But you need to have tight ends to provide chipping and pass protection help. So a lot of different things coming together here. Ethan, what do you, in terms of play selection, what do you think's the chess move for Lincoln Riley to use next? Because screen game was the big feature against Michigan. So you're inviting Michigan to attack, and you get them out of position. You make them overcommit. You make them over rush. They get out of their lanes, and you just loft the ball to the side, and you get open space. You get a lot of acreage outside the boundary. So opponents are going to see that, and they might be sitting back. What do you think is the next wrinkle for Lincoln Riley in terms of not just adjusting to not having Sanders and Jordan, but also to defenses saying, oh, that screen game, maybe we need to sit back a little bit. What do you think's the chess move? One suggestion: Jaden Mailata keeping the ball on a read. That might be like the next thing that Lincoln Riley needs to lean into to get defenses constantly guessing off balance. Like Lincoln Riley's been in his bag. It's been back to the usual standard of Lincoln Riley play calling this season. Forget about the other aspects of coaching. His play calling has been on point. It definitely was against Michigan. What do you think is the next chess move for Lincoln Riley? Ethan first, Crash second.
So I think that, we're kind of on the same page about the quarterback running the ball a little bit more. I went in a little bit of a different direction with it, though. I think we could see a little bit more of that Hassan Longstreet package maybe that we saw against Illinois. Because I think that, I was a little bit surprised they didn't use it at all in this game, but they didn't end up needing it because the screen game was just working so well. But I think that, if you want to keep everybody's legs fresh, if you want to get a really elite dynamic runner in the game, he made a couple of difference-making runs against Illinois. So getting him in there to keep the running backs fresh could really work out well. I just think you have to keep defenses honest. So if you're going to employ that play, you gotta have Longstreet hand the ball off, kind of like the Illinois game. He came in, he handed the ball off for one play. People were kind of like, "What the heck? Why was he in there? Did Mailata's helmet come off and we missed it?" And then later in the game, you realize, it was 40 chess because he was setting up the run play later in the game. So you have to have him hand the ball off here and there. You also maybe have him throw one or two quick easy passes as well. But I think his legs are a real talent, and he showed in the games that he played that he's a real dynamic and even physical runner. So, not anything that's going to risk him getting hurt, but if you can, throw him in there a couple of times to keep the running backs fresh, I think it's a strategy worth considering for sure.
I'd wonder if you more go the Mailata route. And I'm not saying that we won't see Hassan Longstreet again, but I'm just wondering, it seems like if USC wants to give him an extra year, he can only play in one more game. So USC's got to figure out what game would they want to use it. So it's really only something you can kind of use once. So I'm not saying that it won't happen, but I would probably lean more with Matt and say that it might be more you have Jaden Mailata run the ball a bit more. So I think it would be more that. Just not that I don't think it would happen, but Hassan Longstreet, I'm assuming Lincoln Riley wants to preserve a year of eligibility and give him time to develop. Maybe it's something they can use more next year, assuming Mailata doesn't turn pro. But I think it's something that we probably can only really see one more time if USC wants to keep Longstreet's red shirt. So for that reason, I think it might be more Mailata running and not so much of that next wrinkle being strategically implementing Longstreet in once in a while to give the running backs a